to be alone, to be isolated, to feel the need to connect with another soul. These are deeply modern sensations, and yet they are also nothing new. There has always been a yearning to know that we are not alone, to know that someone sees us, knows us, and loves us all the same. The human experience is one of living in relationship to others, and yet, this experience can also feel so elusive. In our continual attempts to belong, we have long taken the simplest path towards affirming our identity in opposition to others. I made the cut because you did not. I am in because you are out. I am loved because you are not. These desperate appeals to being worth something come at the cost of the other. They are an attempt to make sense of who we are through defining ourselves in contrast with others. However, we are also keenly aware of how dangerous of a proposition this is. For surely, if we are defined in opposition to someone else, then they are also acting in opposition to us. When they are on the inside of a group, this also means that we are on the outside. They are loved because we are not. And so this devastating dance has continued down the centuries. Generation after generation of people, individual after individual, from Adam blaming Eve to my blaming the person in the other vehicle. We have all sought to justify ourselves at the expense of our neighbor, friend, and family. There was, however, one man who didn't seem to fall into this trap. He knew to whom he belonged, and claimed that we could belong as well. He didn't place boundaries around who could enter. He only offered a way by which we might enter in. He did not force people to join him. He did not coerce a false love. He instead claimed that we could all belong to his Father, not in opposition to one another, but rather through mutual love. No one above the other, but all dependent on one another. A new way to be in relationship, a new way to be human. There have been some who found this offer attractive, but many more who've experienced the danger of it more keenly still. For as this man said, there is only one way to enter into this new kind of life, and that is to give up the old. And unfortunately, we've become well adept in the old way of being, the ancient practice of knowing who we are in opposition to the other. We like knowing that we're in, even if it means that others are out. We might even like the fact that the others are out. And so we took this man, and we attempted to get rid of him, to snuff out his message about who we might become. We tried to intimidate him. We tried to discredit him. And when those efforts didn't work, we killed him. And yet, even as he hung on his cross, his message was clearly preached. I know. I know that you are hurting, that you are scared and ashamed and in need of hope, but you're not alone. I want to suffer too. So behold the man. Consider the passion of the one who suffers to be love for this world, to be love for you. So Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. You sit here, he said to the disciples, while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee with him, and began to be very upset and distressed. My soul is overwhelmed with grief, he said, even to death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Then, going a little further on, he fell on his face and prayed, My Father, he said, if it is possible, please, please let this cup go away from me, but not what I want, but what you want. He came back to the disciples and found them asleep. So, he said to Peter, couldn't you keep watch with me for a single hour? Watch and pray so that you don't get pulled down into the time of testing. The spirit is eager, but the body is weak. Again, for a second time, he went off and said, My Father, if it's not possible for this to pass unless I drink it, let your will be done. Again he came and found them asleep. Their eyes were heavy. Once more he left them and went away. He prayed for the 3rd time, using the same words once again. Then he came back to the disciples. You can sleep now, he said, and have a good rest. Look, the time has come. The Son of Man is given over into the hands of wicked people. Get up and let's be going. Look, here comes the one who's going to betray me. While Jesus was still speaking, there was Judas, one of the 12. He had come with a large crowd, with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. The one who was intending to betray him gave them a sign. The one I kiss, that's him. Grab hold of him. So he went at once to Jesus and said, Greetings, teacher, and kissed him. My friend, said Jesus, what have you come to do? Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and arrested him. At that, one of the men with Jesus reached out his hand, drew his sword, and hit the high priest's slave, cutting off his ear. Put your sword back where it belongs, said Jesus to him. People who use the sword die by the sword. Don't you realize that I could call on my Father and have him send me more than 12 legions of angels just like that? But how, then, can the scriptures come true when it says that this has to happen? At that time, Jesus said to the crowds, Have you really come out with swords and sticks to arrest me, as if I were some kind of brigand? I sat there teaching in the temple every day, and you didn't arrest me. But all this has happened so that the writings of the prophets would be fulfilled. Then all the disciples abandoned him and ran away. The people who had arrested Jesus took him off to Caiaphas, the high priest. The scribes and elders had already gathered at his house. Peter, however, followed him at some distance, all the way to the high priest's residence. He went in and sat with the servants to see how things would work out. The high priest and the whole council tried to produce false evidence against Jesus, to frame a capital charge and have him killed. But even though they brought in plenty of lying witnesses, they couldn't even find the evidence they wanted. Finally, 2 people came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I can destroy God's temple and build it again in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up. "Aren't you going to answer," he said, "what these people are accusing you of?" But Jesus remained silent. Then the high priest said to him, "I put you on oath before the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, God's Son." "You said the words," replied Jesus, "but let me tell you this. From now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes. "He's blasphemed," he said. "Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, you've heard his blasphemy, here and now. What's your verdict?" "He deserves to die," they answered. Then they spat in his face and hit him. Some of them slapped him and said, "Prophesy for us, Messiah. Who was it who hit you?" Meanwhile, Peter sat outside in the courtyard. One of the servant girls came up to him. "You were with Jesus, the Galilean too, weren't you?" she said. He denied it in front of everyone. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. He went out to the gateway. Another girl saw him and said to the people who were there, "This fellow was with Jesus, the Nazarene." Once more he denied it, this time swearing, "I don't know the man." After a little while, the people standing around him came up and said to Peter, "You really are one of them. Look, the way you talk makes it obvious." Then he began to curse and swear, "I don't know the man." And then all at once the cock crowed. And Peter remembered. He remembered the words Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and cried like a child. When dawn broke, all the chief priests and elders of the people held a council meeting about Jesus in order to have him put to death. They tied him up, took him off, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. So Jesus stood in front of the governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked him. "If you say so," replied Jesus. The chief priests and the elders poured out their accusations against him, but he made no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you hear all this evidence they are bringing against you?" He gave him no answer, not even a word, which quite astonished the governor. Now, the governor had a custom. At festival time, he used to release one prisoner for the crowd, whoever they chose. Just then, they had a famous prisoner, called Jesus Barabbas. So when the people were all gathered there, Pilate said to them, "Who do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, the so-called Messiah?" He knew that they'd handed him over out of sheer envy. While he was presiding in the court, his wife sent a message to him. "Don't have anything to do with that man," she said. "He's innocent. I've suffered much today in a dream, all because of him." The high priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. So when the governor came back to them again and asked, "Which of the two do you want me to release for you?" they said, "Barabbas." "So what shall I do with Jesus, the so-called Messiah?" asked Pilate. "Let him be crucified," they all said. "Why?" asked Pilate. "What's he done wrong?" But they shouted all the louder, "Let him be crucified." Pilate saw it was no good. In fact, there was a riot brewing. So he took some water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I'm not guilty of this man's blood," he said. "It's your problem." "Let his blood be on us," answered all the people, "and on our children." Then Pilate released Barabbas for them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the barracks and gathered the whole regiment together. They took off his clothes and dressed him up in a scarlet military cloak. They wove a crown out of thorns and stuck it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. Then they knelt down in front of him. "Greetings, King of the Jews," they said, making fun of him. They spat on him. Then they took the reed and beat him about the head. When they had finished mocking him, they took off the cloak, dressed him in his own clothes again, and led him off to crucify him. As they were going out, they found a man from Cyrene called Simon. They forced him to carry Jesus' cross. When they came to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, they gave him a drink of wine mixed with bitter herbs. When he tasted it, he refused to drink it. Then they crucified him. They divided up his clothes by casting lots, and they sat down and kept watch over him there. And they placed the written charge above his head, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then they crucified 2 brigands alongside him, one on his right and one on his left. The people who were going by shouted blasphemies at Jesus. They shook their heads at him. "So," they said, "you were going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, were you? Save yourself if you're God's son. Come down from the cross." The chief priests too, and the scribes and the elders mocked him. He rescued others, they said, but he can't rescue himself. All right, so he's the king of Israel. Well, let him come down from the cross right now, and then we'll really believe that he is. He trusted in God. Let God deliver him now. If he's that keen on him, after all, he did say he was God's son. The brigands who were crucified alongside him heaped insults on him as well. From noon until mid-afternoon, there was darkness over the whole land. About the middle of the afternoon, Jesus shouted out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why did you abandon me? Some of the people who were standing there heard it and said, this fellow is calling Elijah. One of them ran at once and got a sponge. He filled it with vinegar put it on a reed, and gave him a drink. The others said, "Wait a bit. Let's see if Elijah is going to rescue him." But Jesus shouted out loudly one more time, and then breathed his last breath. At that instant, the temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks were split, and the tombs burst open. Many bodies of the sleeping holy ones were raised. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city, where they appeared to many people. When the centurion and the others with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they were scared out of their wits. "He really was God's son," they said. There were several women there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee, helping to look after his needs. They included Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. When evening came, a rich man from Arimathea arrived. He was called Joseph, and he too was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and requested the body of Jesus. Pilate gave the orders that it should be given to him. So Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. He laid it in his own new tomb, which he had carved out of the rock. Then he rolled a large stone across the doorway of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene was there, and so was the other Mary. They were sitting opposite the tomb.
Were
Go silently and in peace. May Jesus Christ, who for our sake became obedient to death, even death on a cross, keep you and strengthen you through this night and forevermore. Amen.